Knight of Man, the battle for Earth's survival, is a two-player card-driven tactical war game set in a futuristic world where aliens known as killers have taken control of the Earth. Humans have been fighting against these invaders for 3 years, and humans fight as militias, dusting off old tanks and adapting new technology. Some humans have even evolved and developed great powers. These, known as mentals, can control minds, move metal, and throw energy as a weapon. Together, humanity struggles to emerge from the Night of Man. Night of Man includes 4 10 7/8 of an inch by 15 5/8 of an inch mounted map boards. 5 counter sheets containing 5 1.5 inch counters, 170 1 3/8 of an inch counters, and 75 half-inch counters. 54 playing cards, 4 8.5 by 11 inch player aid cards, and 1 32-page rule and scenario book. Let's take a look at the turn sequence. In the first phase, draw cards, players receive up to 4 cards, which is the maximum number they can hold in their hands. Then, initiative is determined. Each player selects a card and places it face down in front of him. Then the cards are flipped, and the card with the highest targeting number wins the initiative for that player. That card is discarded. The player that did not win the initiative gets to keep his card. In the next phase, each of the players alternate taking impulses, starting with the player with the initiative. The player fills his hand by drawing cards, and then may play 1 card for its action. In this case, a card is played for a move action, and in this example, 1 infantry unit is moved. Note that an additional card can be played to support an action. After the action is performed on the board, an administrative marker, in this example a move marker, is placed on the unit, the card used for the action is discarded, and the player can also discard 2 additional cards from his hand. When a number of end turn cards called for by the scenario have been laid down, or when both players pass consecutively, play passes to the next phase, the reserve phase. In this phase, starting with the initiative player, units that are still eligible may move in a limited way. If they are more than 3 squares away from enemy units, armored units may move 3 squares and infantry units 2, but they may never enter an enemy square. And if the units start within 3 squares of enemy units, they can only move 1 square, but again, they can never enter any enemy square. And finally, the last phase is the cleanup phase, where markers are removed except damage and shaken markers, and players can discard all but 1 of the cards in their hands. Let's take a look at the different unit types that exist in this game. There's infantry type units and vehicles. In addition, there are individuals represented as characters, and markers, including administrative markers, which are used to keep track of the status of combat units. Let's take a look at the information printed on the counters themselves. This militia infantry unit has a movement allowance of 3 and belongs to the leg class of units. It has a high explosive factor of 1 and has an assault plus ability. Abilities are skills that the units have that have an effect on play and for which you do not have to play a card. The unit also has a power, explosive rounds. Powers, different from abilities, require the play of a specific card to have their effect on the game. There's a targeting modifier of -1, which is used to fire at vehicles, an armor piercing factor, which reflects the ability of this unit to destroy vehicles once they're hit, and an armor factor, in this case an asterisk, because this is a soft target. Throughout the game, only eligible units can perform actions, and eligible units are those that do not have an ops complete, moved, or fire marker on them. In this example, only the Bradley tank at left and Jack are eligible units. Shaken units have their movement allowance reduced by half, fractions rounded down. They cannot execute ranged fire, nor can they initiate assault combat. An assault combat against shaken units is not simultaneous. The attacking units inflict their hits on shaken units before the shaken units can fire back. Shaken markers are not removed at the end of the turn. To remove them, the affected unit must be rallied. Let's take a look at the terrain types present on the map of this game. The effects of terrain on movement and combat are summarized in the terrain effects chart. The most predominant is clear terrain, but there's also woods, hills, rough terrain, and there's also buildings that occupy one square like this radar station and this multi-square building, a wall, and this pond and this other pond, as well as a junkyard, rubble, cultivated fields, and when vehicles are destroyed, they become wrecks, having effect on movement. In this game, line of sight is determined by tracing an imaginary line from the center of the firing unit square to the center of the target square. In this example, this destroyer has a clear line of sight to the militia infantry unit. Here, the line of sight of the destroyer to the infantry passes through this junkyard square, which has a red outline. Red outlines block line of sight between targets and firers at the same level, like in this example. However, if the destroyer fires from a hill, the junkyard is not an obstacle at all, and it would have a clear line of sight to the militia infantry. Stacking and transport. In this game, stacking rules are simply up to 2 units per square, and stacking limits are applicable at all times. Units with their movement allowance encased in a circle are transport units like this M113. Transport units may move up to half of their movement allowance and still embark or disembark passengers. Here, the transport moves 4 movement points, half of its movement allowance, and then disembarks the transported infantry. Knight of Man is a card-driven game, and cards are used to conduct actions, support actions, and reactions during the enemy player's turn. The green blocks denote actions that a player may take with his units during a turn. In addition to playing a card with a green action, a player may play an additional card with a yellow action. These are supports to enhance the performance of the units during the action played. Finally, blocks in red denote reactions, and these can be played by a player during his opponent's turn. Let's take a look at an example of movement by a leg unit. The unit here is a Dragon Militia unit, and it has a movement allowance of 3 movement points. And the player plays this card for its move action. The Dragon unit will move 3 squares along 3 clear terrain squares, expending its full movement allowance, after which a move marker is placed on the unit. In this game, facing is important as to vehicles and how they move and receive fire. This destroyer has the frontal squares shown in green. Vehicles can only move into their frontal squares. The flank squares are shown here in orange. To move a vehicle, a card has to be played for its move action. And if the vehicle does not wish to move to its frontal squares, it has to pivot, and pivoting costs 1 movement point. After which, the vehicle can move and pivot as long as it has enough movement points left to do so. In this game, there's 2 types of fire: ranged fire and assault combat. Let's take a look at ranged fire, which occurs between units in different squares. To determine the range high explosive factor total, we take into account the firing unit's high explosive factor, any range modifiers, any abilities or powers on both sides, as well as the defender's terrain die roll modifier. In this example, we see a mecha unit firing at the infantry unit. The mecha has a high explosive factor of 2. it has a clear line of sight to the militia unit. We check the high explosive range modifiers table. At a range of 2, there is a +1 and a -1 because of the defender's woods terrain for a total high explosive factor of 2. So we draw 2 cards to resolve the attack. The first card is a hit, and the second card drawn has no wording on the top of the box, so that is a miss. The first hit always shakes the defending unit, so we place a shaken marker on the unit, and the firing unit receives a fired marker. When conducting range fire with multiple units, the units in addition to the firing lead unit only contribute their high explosive factor. In this particular example, 3 infantry units with clear lines of sight fire at this shaken mecha unit in a building square. The first card played is a card with a fire action. The second card played, Bullet Storm, adds 1 to the high explosive factor of the infantry attack. And the alien player plays countermeasures in reaction, and this reduces the high explosive factor attack by 1. We resolve the attack. We start with 1 for the lead unit's high explosive factor, +1 for the range, +1 for the Bullet Storm support, and +2 for the additional firing unit's high explosive factor. -1 because of the defender's terrain, -1 because the defender has a difficult target ability, and -1 because of the defender's countermeasures reaction. The first card is a hit, and the mecha unit is flipped to its reduced side. The second card, however, is a miss. The third card is a hit, and that destroys the mecha unit. And all 3 firing units receive a fire marker, and that's the end of that multiple unit combat. Let's take a look now at an example of opportunity fire, which occurs during the other player's turn. Here we see Larkin, a militia sniper, with a high explosive factor rating of 2. The alien player plays a card for a move action and starts moving one of his mecha units. When the mecha unit reaches a range of 6 squares, the militia player declares that he will do an opportunity fire attack and plays a card for its fire action. Larkin has a clear line of sight to the target, and normally an attack at a range of 6 would suffer from a -1 die roll modifier, but Larkin, being a sniper with a special ability, has no such penalty. So he flips 2 cards. The first card drawn is a hit, and the second card drawn is a hit with an asterisk, and this is only a hit in assault combat situations. So the mecha unit suffers only 1 hit. Consequently, a shaken marker is placed on the defending unit, and Larkin, having conducted opportunity fire, now receives a fired marker. Let's take a look at the other form of combat in the game, assault combat. Only units with the Assault Plus and Assault ability may initiate assault combat. We total the high explosive factors of the attacking units plus any abilities, powers, and supporting cards, and we subtract any defender's ability and do the same from the defender's perspective. The side that suffers the most hits loses and retreats, and assault combat is considered simultaneous. So here we see 2 militia units in proximity of a mecha unit, and the militia player plays this card for the Let's Get 'em action, which allows both units to move. Now one of the infantry units moves 3 squares and enters the mecha's space. The second infantry unit does the same, moving 3 spaces, and now we have combat with 2 infantry units against 1 mecha unit. So now we total the high explosive factors of the attackers, 2 plus 2, because each has a Assault Plus ability. That gives us 4 cards to draw. Of the 4 cards drawn, 2 are hits. So the first hit shakes the mecha unit, and the second hit inverts it to its reduced side. Now we resolve the fire of the mecha unit with its original strength of 2. Remember that assault combat is simultaneous. So 2 cards are consulted. Only 1 is a hit. One of the infantry units is shaken, but the mecha, having suffered more hits, is defeated and has to retreat. And we end the combat by placing a moved marker on both infantry units. Vehicle combat involves a two-step process. First, we determine if the target vehicle is hit, and then, if it is, we determine the effect of the hit. We begin by counting the number of squares between the firing unit and the target. This is the base number. We subtract the firing unit's targeting modifier and add any cover factor for the defending unit's terrain, and the result is the modified to-hit number. Here, an alien destroyer has an Abrams tank 5 spaces away. The alien player plays this card for its fire action. The range is 5 and the destroyer has a clear line of sight to his target. We subtract from the range 4 for the firing unit's targeting modifier. There is no modification for range, and so the modified to-hit number is 1 or more. So we flip one card and we consult the result in the bottom left box, a 2, and that is a hit. The Abrams has an armor factor of 4, and the firing destroyer has an armor piercing factor of 6. Now we flip a card and consult the armor piercing factor bonus. It is -2, so the total armor piercing factor for this attack is 4, and if that is equal or greater to the target's armor, the target is destroyed. The Abrams has an armor value of 4, so it is destroyed and flipped to its wrecked side. And we finish the combat by placing a fired marker on the destroyer unit. Artillery attacks are not frequent in this game, but when they happen, they can be devastating. With artillery, the player can attack one square in the line of sight of one of his friendly units and 2 adjacent squares. And here we have various examples of patterns of 3 squares that can be attacked. An artillery attack is initiated by the play of a card with an artillery action, and the strength of the attack here, as per the card, is 3 armor-piercing factors against hard targets and 3 high explosive factors against soft targets. Here, Ascara, a militia character, has a clear line of sight to the square, which is flanked by alien units on both sides. Therefore, all 3 squares can be attacked. We start by resolving the attack against the square with the 2 alien units. The high explosive factor here is 3, but because there's 2 units in the square, 1 additional card will be chosen for 4. So of the 4 cards consulted, only 2 are hits. And we have to split the hits between the units in the square, so each of the mecha units receives a shaken marker. Now we resolve the attack against the Warper unit, which is also a soft target. The high explosive factor attack is 3, so we flip 3 cards. 2 are hits. Consequently, the Warper is shaken because of the first hit and flipped to its reduced side because of the second. And now we resolve the artillery barrage against the destroyer tank. The tank is a hard target, so we flip a card and consult the armor piercing factor bonus. The result is a 4, which is added to the strength of the artillery attack of 3 for a total armor piercing factor of 7, which is higher than the armor factor of the destroyer. So the destroyer receives a shaken result, and in artillery attacks, armored targets cannot receive anything worse than a shaken result. In this game, usually units in an impulse move or fire, but under certain circumstances, they can do both, and that is through the play of this card for the move and fire action. Of course, the fire portion will have some penalties. In vehicle combat, if the to-hit result shows an MF on the top box, it is an automatic miss. And the strength of a high explosive factor attack is always reduced by 1 in a move and fire action. Rallying is an action that can be undertaken to remove shaken markers from units or to conduct reconstitution, that is, return reduced units to full strength. Here the militia player plays this Bloodlust card, which allows him to rally 1 unit but with the added benefit of not having to place an ops complete marker on top of the unit, which is the case during a normal rallying action. The shaken marker is now removed from this Abrams tank, and the Abrams tank does not get an ops complete marker, meaning that it is eligible for activation. Powers are special skills that units have that come into play only by playing an action card that reads Power. In this example, the militia character Doc has a power called Telekinetic Blast. To be able to use this power, the militia player plays this fire card that reads Power. This power can attack an armored target or an infantry target with an armor-piercing factor or high explosive factor of 3 respectively within 6 spaces of the unit possessing the power. We flip a card and consult the armor-piercing factor bonus. It is a 1, which added to the attack strength of 3 results in 4, which is greater than the hovercraft's armor factor of 0, so the hovercraft is destroyed and turned into a wreck, and Doc receives a fired marker. Normally, a unit that executes a ranged fire attack receives a fire marker. Similarly, a unit that moves or moves and initiates assault receives a moved marker. These units are no longer eligible to be activated in a turn. However, play of a second wind action removes a moved or fire marker from one unit, allowing that unit to be activated in a later impulse of the same turn. Similarly, a reload and fire action allows a previously fired unit to fire once again at the original target, after which it receives an ops complete marker. Some scenarios include walkers on the alien side. Walkers are giant biped vehicles with special attributes. There are 2 types, the heavy walker or panther and the light walker cheetah. Walkers are constructed by the alien player before play begins. The player receives 7 construction points for a heavy walker and 5 for a light one. Points are used to purchase enhancements for targeting, armor, weapons, and mobility. Each enhancement has its own cost in construction points, and enhancement markers are placed on the walker counter. When walkers fire, they can fire all their weapons, and when a walker takes a hit, it removes its topmost armor enhancement marker. Night of Man includes 8 scenarios. Each scenario has its own victory conditions, participating units, and special rules. These scenarios are linked by a common storyline. The first scenario, Stand and Deliver, is a 1-map scenario which is recommended for players who are learning the game. There are also 2 and 3 map scenarios. There are also rules for players to create their own scenarios by using points to purchase their forces. For now, let's take a look at the setup for Scenario 18.8, Punching Through. In Punching Through, the militia has suffered a setback, with numerous tank wrecks littering the battlefield. However, the Earthers refuse to give up, and they have scrapped together a force composed of some infantry, some mentals, and a couple of tanks. The Killers, on the other hand, are determined to end resistance and advance in force to eliminate the militia and capture their headquarters. They enter the map with 3 mechas, 3 hover cars, 2 destroyers, a bouncer, a shredder, and a panther heavy walker. The militia stands ready, awaiting the aliens with 1 command and 2 infantry units, 1 50 cal squad, 2 Abrams tanks, 1 M901, and 4 heroes. The militia, however, has some surprises in store for the aliens. They have a Dragon anti-tank squad that may appear at any time in a square with a cover factor of 1 and automatically fire. Although there are a number of wrecks laying on the battlefield, not everything is what it seems. Once an alien unit is within 4 spaces of any of these wrecks, there's a chance that a full-functioning but motionless Abrams tank may appear, or that a mine may detonate, crashing the aliens' computers. Also, the militia may play 2 power cards in their impulse to call an artillery strike. This is Night of Man, a 2-player, card-driven, futuristic tactical game by Flying Pig Games. Complexity is low-medium. Solitaire suitability is low unless the game is played using a solitaire expansion that also adds new enemies and terrain tiles to the Night of Man saga. I hope that this video has given you an idea of the flow of the game and what the game has to offer. This is Stuka Joe signing off for now. Thanks for watching.